Hello, I am David R.M. Saavedra from Virginia Commonwealth University, and glad to be able to present my talk, Moral Distress and Disrupted Teacher-Student Relationships in the Height of COVID, in this format for the Relation-Centered Education Network Conference. I'm disappointed I wasn't able to be there in person with everyone, but glad for the opportunity to present virtually. So when COVID-19 forced schools to move instruction online, teacher-student relationships were completely disrupted, and the nature of these relationships was fundamentally altered. Students and teachers projected digital headshots into a mosaic of tiny boxes on a screen, which really turned out to be an impoverished approximation of togetherness, particularly when video was turned off and student faces were hidden, as in this image here. Gestures that had once seemed insignificant, the offer of a pencil, a pat on the shoulder, a high five, were in their absence realized to be indispensable in establishing the relations of care that support learning in schools. Even when able to be in person together, masks hid smiles and other facial expressions, and social distancing prevented close contact. A shift in teachers' connection to their students occurred. They could no longer rely on the connection and reciprocity that caring for another entails. So teachers really could no longer care for their students. They could only care about their students from afar. The quotation here from Lily Miller, not being able to even see their face or their expressions or their body language. I cried for the first month because I was like, I don't even know. Is anyone even there? Is anyone listening? So this quotation illustrates just how much of an impact the relational disruption from COVID had on teachers at the time. This presentation explores how these changes to the ways in which teachers were able to relate to students during COVID affected their professional sense of self, particularly for teachers of English for speakers of other languages, or ESOL. In doing so, we're able to see just how entwined the relational side of teaching is with the development and maintenance of a teacher's professional identity. This presentation puts forth findings from a larger multiple case ethnography focusing on how secondary ESOL teachers in Virginia experience and understand the relationships they form with students from other cultural backgrounds. I conducted a series of interviews with 8 of these teachers using Seidman's method of in-depth interviewing. Each participant sat for 3 90-minute interviews over the course of a couple weeks. And my analysis of the data was holistic and inductive with a view towards cultural interpretation. As is typical of multiple case studies, each participant's interviews were analyzed individually prior to conducting cross-case comparisons and analysis. This presentation focuses in on one aspect of the study and looks at the question of how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the experience of cross-cultural teacher-student relationships for secondary ESOL teachers. So what did these teachers have to say about their experience of academic relationships with students during the pandemic? Here are a number of telling quotes. So Ms. Potter said, "You can't teach and not have the social emotional piece. The social emotional piece is an ingredient that's needed for teaching and the exchange. Otherwise, you're just a presenter." And I think a lot of that is happening right now. People are being presenters. So Ms. Potter really sees this fundamental shift in essentially what she's doing. Teaching has this what she calls the social emotional piece, and what I'm referring to as kind of relational. Like, in order to teach, that is necessary, and that's taken away, and she's kind of been demoted, you might say, to being just a presenter, just presenting information, not really teaching and having that relationship part of it. Ms. Tanner says, "I'm accepting work now that in the past I would have always helped a child correct and ameliorate. They need a lot. They need more than I can give them when they're virtual. I just can't do that." So Ms. Tanner, in terms of her kind of professional standards, finds that she has to actually lower them and accept work that she would have previously found unacceptable. And so that kind of ties into this, I think, sense of identity shift during the pandemic with teachers. Mr. Cabrera says, we are missing something that makes the world a little bit better. Seeing people smile. We're missing that, and it's a shame. So for Mr. Cabrera, that kind of human connection, again, the relational piece is missing during COVID. Ms. Miller says, same teacher from the first slide. So in addition to that kind of experience of crying for a month because she couldn't see any of her students' faces on Zoom, she expounds a little bit more and says, I don't even know who some of those kids are because their screens are blank. I don't have even the knowledge, some of them, of who exactly they are because I can't see them. So that idea of being able to make some connection with students is disrupted in COVID because she wouldn't even recognize them on the street. She doesn't even know what her students look like. Ms. Baker says the huge difference between teaching in person and teaching during COVID is the relationships. I do not have near the relationships I had with my kids last year or the past 3 years. It's December. Normally we'd be a lot further along. I feel like these relationships are still September relationships. I definitely feel that my connection with my kids is not as strong. So she's thinking about things in terms of how relationships progress over the course of the year. And by December, during COVID, she's still feeling like we have this disconnect. We're not starting to get to know each other. We're not starting to feel a rapport with one another. Everything is still super formal, and people are nervous, and there's not a lot of trust because it's like the very, very early stages of getting to know one another, even though we've been working together for months at this point during COVID. And then finally, I'll give a longer example, but from Ms. Weaver, but that's very poignant, I think. Pre-COVID, I'd walk down the hall and find them. And so they don't fall off the wagon because I'm there as soon as they start to be falling. But with COVID, you know their phone number, you call, they don't answer. You text, they don't answer. You instant message, they don't answer. You get on WhatsApp and try to get them, they don't answer. You knock on the door, they don't answer. And you do the whole thing again the next week for the same student and the next week for the same student. And it's very discouraging. It is frustrating. And I keep telling myself, you can't give up on them. But then you're like, I can't help it. I can't get to you. I cannot go find you. I can't give you what you need. So why do I keep trying to give you just a little bit? It's just not enough for that student or for some others. Even Javier, it's disheartening. And that's why I'm at the point where I don't know if he really needs to graduate. I don't know what good it's going to do him. And I would never have said that in non-COVID. So for Ms. Weaver, she feels this immense disconnect with certain students who she can't get in touch with and who don't respond. And she's kind of at her wit's end, not knowing what to do next. She's tried everything she can think of, and she does it over and over and over and over again without response. And she's starting to give up in a way that she felt that she would never have done previously. She's kind of unable to maintain the sense of responsibility she has for students in kind of a caring relationship because she's not getting anything back from them. So how can we interpret these teachers' experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic? I think the concept of moral distress, which was originated by Jameton in the field of nursing ethics in 1984, is quite instructive. So he defines moral distress as a particular feeling that comes to be when one knows the right thing to do, but institutional constraints make it nearly impossible to pursue the right course of action. That's a direct quote from his original explanation of this idea. In situations of moral distress, the difficulty being faced is not actually moral or ethical in nature because the ethical path forward has already been identified. The person suffering from moral distress knows what they should do, but they are prevented from doing it. So they want to engage in ethical action. They want to do what they think is right, but they cannot because they're prevented from doing so somehow. Moral distress has a strong affective dimension and is felt most acutely by those who perform emotional labor in caring for others. Another scholar, Walsh, argues that moral distress often arises when a carer realizes that she has been prevented from needing the needs of one she's caring for, resulting in a relationship that has become at least partially fractured. And I think we can see some of that in the quotes up above, particularly from Miss Weaver. This concept of moral distress seems to me to encapsulate what the teachers I interviewed were experiencing during the pandemic. They believed strongly in the importance of relationship building as part of their teaching practice. They felt supportive relationships were particularly important for immigrant students and multilingual learners because of the extra burdens of language learning and cultural adjustment and personal struggles these students were navigating on top of their education. And the pandemic abruptly and drastically upended teachers' ability to develop and nurture their relationships with students. When these ESOL teachers were no longer able to relate to students in the same ways and at the same level they had previously, they were prevented from teaching their students in the way that they believed it should be done. So over time, the continued experience of moral distress led to kind of a questioning of their professional identity. They lowered their standards and accepted subpar work. They felt downgraded from being teachers to being just merely presenters. They felt so disheartened that they questioned previously held moral codes of not giving up on students. So the caring impulse central to their relationships with students often went unfulfilled because of a breakdown in central components of care. At times, this breakdown was a lack of response from the cared for. Right? So when students didn't respond to teachers' attempts to get in touch, when they kept their cameras off during virtual class meetings or didn't come to in-person school days, teachers were left actually feeling kind of abandoned by them. And in addition, their efforts to support students kind of went unacknowledged, which made their efforts to care feel kind of worthless. Right? And then in addition to this kind of lack of response from the cared for, at other times, the breakdown in care stemmed from teachers' inability to competently meet student needs, both pedagogically and emotionally. So virtual instruction forced ESOL teachers to change their practice in ways they knew to be subpar. Relational connection over the internet was exceedingly difficult, while in-person hugging or physically comforting an upset student in any way was forbidden, and masks covered up reassuring facial expressions, right? So these pandemic-induced changes cause ESOL teachers to question their efficacy as well as teachers, and contributed to them losing a sense of purpose. So now that we're well out of lockdown, what's the use of this type of analysis? Teachers and students can go back to familiar ways of relating, so why linger on what happened during COVID? I believe it's important to recognize just how central the relational aspect of the teaching and learning experience is. When the world disrupted our ability to relate to one another, the effects on teachers were profound. If the relationships they form with students are so very important to teachers' professional identities and their desire to do their job well and their desire to continue to do their job, then we should be paying attention to that and creating conditions in our schools for teacher-student relationships to grow and flourish. In an era of teacher shortages and high rates of teacher turnover, this is important. If we want to recruit and retain dedicated teachers, we need to lean into the relational aspects of teaching and take them seriously as both a matter of practice and a matter of scholarship. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your watching this talk, and here's the title and my contact information once again. Please reach out with questions or comments. I'd love to be able to start up a virtual conversation with anyone who's interested. Thank you very much.